Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tiff Talks Tech. Today, I want to unpack the messy middle of multifamily marketing and technology by talking about one of the most overused and under-questioned metrics in marketing, which is ROI, return on investment. We love to talk about it, and I get it. It is how we justify our spend, we prove value, and we fight for next year's budget. But here's the thing. We've reduced ROI to how many leads did this get us? And that mindset, it's not only just limiting, but it can get dangerous. So today we want to go beyond the ROI spreadsheet because there's a return we're not necessarily measuring and it's costing us more than we actually think. If the only ROI that we're chasing is short-term leases per dollar, we miss out on the bigger picture, like long-term brand equity, operational efficiency, and also team morale, which is so important. So today, I want to really think about what kind of ROI are we not talking about and what happens when we start talking about it. So let's start with what everyone thinks ROI means, and that's the classic equation. ROI equals revenue minus spend divided by spend. In marketing, that usually translates to how many leads did this campaign generate, how many leases came from the spend, and can we tie this back to our bottom line? And I'm not here to dunk on that for sure. The performance really, really matters. But this approach assumes that every marketing initiative can and should have a clean dollar for dollar return. And here's a spoiler, that's not always the case. That's not how it works. So let's break this down. I want to break open the black box and look at some non-traditional forms of ROI that matter just as much, but they rarely get tracked. So first, return on brand. Every time you invest in content, storytelling, or social engagement, you're building that brand equity. It may not convert today, but it's building familiarity, trust, and recognition. That translates to lower cost per lease over time. But most teams, they don't measure that. So when somebody comes in and they say to your team, you were the first community I thought of when I started looking for apartments, that's brand ROI. The next thing I want to talk about is our return on efficiency. So, we have all these tech stacks and they're here to help us save time. So what happens when your tech stack shaves 20 hours off your team's workload every week? That's ROI in the form of time, speed, and sanity. Tools that automate lead follow-up or they streamline leasing operations aren't just nice to have, but they drive real measurable returns for your team. If your team spends less time chasing unqualified leads, that's ROI, just not the kind that your CRM reports on. A lot of times vendors may even have the time-saving metric. So, it doesn't hurt to ask, but definitely that's a return on your dollar spent and your efficiency. Next, I want to talk about return on reputation. So this would be things like reviews, referrals, word of mouth. How do you measure the impact of a resident telling 5 coworkers that they love living at their apartment community? You probably don't. But those whispers, they're actually converting, even if you don't tangibly see it. A strong reputation is not something that can be bought, but it definitely pays off. So, and that goes back to the return on efficiency. So if your team has more time to focus on more important, more complex tasks, even providing a positive resident experience, all of that goes together and it's making an impact for your properties. Next, I want to talk about return on culture. This one can get very personal. What's the ROI of investing in your marketing team's creativity, voice, and autonomy? If you keep them in a constant state of providing value in a very narrow way, you're going to lose that innovation, morale, and the long-term loyalty. So that's why I say, and I've always said, it's so important to automate those easy tasks, the ones that are just kind of brain dead. Automate those so that your team has time to focus on bringing innovation in and creating a positive environment. I mean, the best way to get them working hard is not just a pizza party, but it's showing that you truly value them as employees. And that's going to make them work harder and making them feel like they have a voice, they can contribute to the team, they're being heard. Those are all so important. Teams that feel trusted, they're going to do better work. Period. End of story. I remember being in a role where it was during COVID. I frequently expressed that I felt nervous because I was living in California. And so the COVID rates, they were really, really high. And I was super nervous about going in the office. I had underlying conditions. I was like, I really don't. The work that I was doing, and this is different when it comes to leasing agents, but the work that I was doing could have been done from home. But I remember there was this constant push to get us back in the office. And honestly, that made me feel like they didn't trust us to do what we were going to do. I honestly felt like I was working better from home because I didn't have someone to turn over and talk to and chat with and lose focus as easily. I felt like I was doing actually a lot more when I could get in my zone in my own house. And then I wasn't worried about catching COVID when it was at its height. So I kept pushing for that and they kept pushing me to go back into the office. And honestly, it felt like they didn't value my health. They didn't value my work. They didn't trust me. So I just felt like, this is not something I want to be doing anymore. And I ended up leaving and finding a better fit for me where I had a lot more autonomy and was able to really provide more value, I felt. So again, like I said, leasing agents, they're not most of the time not working from home, but at the same time, they don't want to feel like they are sitting there being watched and they need to have that autonomy. I also have friends who they work from home and if their computer goes idle, they could get fired if for more than 5 minutes, which is crazy. But, like they don't want to feel like they're constricted. They're not going to do their best work in that environment. So making sure that you really invest in your team's culture and in those relationships. What do people want to do with their careers? How can you help them get there? That's really going to show that you care and they're going to want to put more into the job when you do that. Okay, so if you're nodding along and you're thinking, okay, but what do I do with all that? Here is your playbook to making it happen. First, you want to start tracking your qualitative ROI. So ask things like, what would success feel like here, even if it doesn't show up in my dashboard? How do I know that what I'm doing is successful? So you can add team wins to your monthly reports, like testimonials, time saved from your technology, or even little reputation boosts. If you're seeing that on Google, you have raised it a star, make sure you add that in your reporting and you hone in on the importance. Next, you want to be sure to educate your stakeholders. This is something even I struggle with, especially because when I am talking to stakeholders, sometimes I'm just very to the point. And so I kind of just skip over. And I also don't like to feel like I'm bragging or that I know everything. So this is something that I am continuing to work on as well. But don't just drop the data. You have to tell a story behind it. And so you really want to make sure that you're helping leadership understand that not every win is going to be immediate and not every channel is going to be a closer either. As I've talked about in other episodes, the renter journey, it is all over the place. It's not just one source. So even trying to prove that sense of ROI is kind of convoluted. And so making sure that you're explaining, you can use these points, but making sure that you are telling that story and explaining to your team and those stakeholders why these other elements are so important. So the other thing that I would highly recommend is reframing your metrics. So instead of what did this post convert, how many people, you want to ask, did this increase our visibility, our engagement, or affinity? Create a second scoreboard for those long-term wins that are contributing to your success. And with that said, the last point I want to say on that is you want to make space for a slow burn success. That's what marketing is a lot of the time. Some of the most impactful marketing takes time to actually pay off. And that doesn't mean that it's failing. It means it's working like it's supposed to. So here's another thing I kind of want to talk about because this is something I've struggled with. Here's how you can explain this to your boss. You might understand this, but your boss, your regionals, your owners, they're still asking, how many leases did we get from that email? Why are we spending on social media if it's not converting? What's the ROI on this brand campaign? Here's how you can explain the ROI that they're not used to seeing without losing them. Because a lot of times people, they have short attention spans. And so here's how you can really hone in on the importance of why it matters. First, lead with what they care about. Start by acknowledging what they want to hear: leases, leads, revenue. Then say, I'm tracking those, of course, but here's what else is driving results behind the scenes. Bring in both the short-term metrics and the long-term indicators to the table. Bring in that mix rather than just, okay, our leads are really awful this month. Okay, great. What are we doing about it? Let's have a well-rounded conversation. You also want to tell a story and not just a statistic, like I said. Leaders are people, not robots. So use real anecdotes. This resident found us on Instagram 3 months ago, and they just moved in. Awesome, our social strategy is working. We had 10 branded searches the day after our event campaign launched. Great, that brand equity is paying off. That blog post didn't just convert immediately, but leasing is using it now as a tour tool. Great, that helps your team. These stories give context to the results, and they make intangible wins actually real. Use cost avoidance as ROI as well. This is something you can definitely use. If you can show that your strategy saved time, reduced friction, reduced churn, and avoided higher cost per acquisition down the line, this is something that you want to be able to do. Sometimes the win is what didn't happen, like fewer unqualified leads, clogging up your pipeline and wasting your team's time. You also want to set expectations with your team for that slow burn tactic. Not everything is going to convert in 30 days. So you can say something like, brand awareness isn't a sprint, it's an investment. But when the time comes, we'll already be on the top of their mind. And then you can show how those early indicators like increased engagement, branded search, or better reviews are trending in the right direction. And lastly, on this topic, you want to create wins outside of your CRM. So literally add a slide to your monthly deck called What We're Seeing That the CRM Isn't Showing. You can use this to highlight your brand mentions, resident shoutouts, social engagement spikes, efficiency gains, and content being reused by other teams. Show your boss that there's more to ROI than what fits in that pipeline report. Here's a little quick script that you can steal. We are still tracking leases, but this quarter I'm also showing how our work is driving trust, visibility, and long-term impact, because today's renter isn't just clicking and converting, they're watching, they're lurking, and waiting until they feel confident. And that is what we're building towards. All right, so here's my closing thoughts. ROI, it's not broken, it's just incomplete. We've been trained to measure the easy stuff, the short-term stuff, and the obvious stuff. But when we look beyond the form fills and the phone calls, we start to see a fuller picture. The impact of our brand, the power of our trust, the value of time, reputation, and culture. So here's a little challenge to you. I want you to think about, what kind of ROI are you building that your spreadsheet can't see? Because that might just be the ROI that matters the most. If this episode hit home or it made you rethink how you define success, I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me a DM on LinkedIn or drop a comment and tell me your favorite form of invisible ROI. And if you're loving the podcast, please subscribe and keep listening for new episodes. Until then, keep questioning your metrics and keep trusting your gut. Thanks.